Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to the study session tonight. The purpose of a study session is to offer an opportunity for informal discussion with the City Council or Planning Commission, in this case, the Planning Commission. No formal action is going to be taken tonight. Any statements made by any Planning Commission members or staff members at a study session are informal only and are not to be considered commitments or guarantees of any kind. There we go, we got the disclaimers out of the way. So tonight's topic is going to be update of the housing element of the city's general plan for the period 2015 to 2022. Thank you all for coming out tonight on a rainy night. And do we have a staff report? Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Christian Murdoch. I'm an assistant planner in the planning department. I'm the one that is trying to orchestrate this whole process that many of you know is very big and can be cumbersome, but ultimately, if we can boil it down to a human level, is most effective. And that's what we're hoping to start the process on tonight. The housing element, as it said, is an undertaking every 8 years that the state of California mandates under state law for local governments like the city of Pacifica to figure out what are their specific housing needs, what do the statistics show in terms of income, family size, are they going up, are they going down, is that causing special needs or different housing types for the community that would be most beneficial to them? Are there specific groups like persons with disabilities, seniors, people with extremely low income that aren't going to have housing provided for them without having special undertakings by the government, nonprofit groups, or a partnership of the two? And so the housing element is intended to identify and to lay all of those things out, to put them out there in a document form, and then to solicit public input, which is why we're here tonight. The most important part, in my opinion, is figuring out what the actual community needs are. Statistics are helpful. I can sit in my office and think a lot of things are really important, but if you're not hearing from the community, you have no way to validate that. And so we benefit this evening from the Planning Commission, which are representatives of the citizens and residents of Pacifica. And we have a number of you that live in the city or may be involved in nonprofit or affordable housing activities in the San Mateo County region. And so what we want from you is honest feedback, letting us know the types of housing that's needed in Pacifica over the next 8-year planning horizon. And then we're going to take all that input and then formulate and make sure that this document represents what the community is saying is important. A couple other things. It's important to note that the housing element isn't a development approval. What it is identification and a statement of needs, and it's an identification of places where the city has identified locations where the housing can be built. And so it's not saying housing will go in any of these locations that we've identified, but it's saying that the city is not putting obstacles in the way. It's providing a framework that people with money or interest can build housing that will meet the needs that are identified. And so just want to make that clear. We're not stating that 100 units are going to go here, 50 units are going to go there. Those kinds of decisions at the project level will come back through a similar process to this, through the Planning Commission, through the City Council potentially for approval at a later time. So what we want to do is look sort of in broad strokes at the city level, but then very specific needs at the individual or group level. So with that, I'd like to open it up if the commissioners have specific questions or concerns or ideas. What we need to do, of course, like I said, is ensure we're providing enough sites to meet our regional housing need for this period 2015 through 2022, which was identified through a regional collaborative process as 413 units for the city of Pacifica over that 8-year period. And we've provided a document that we believe allows 424 units to be developed over that time, should the conditions exist for that to happen. And so we believe we're complying with our requirements under state law, but we want to go beyond that and really hear from you as the community. Thank you.
Thank you. So why don't we, in terms of our format, why don't we first go among the commissioners and see if they've got any questions or comments, and then we'll open it up to the folks who've come here from the public. And with that, why don't we, should we start at the very front with Commissioner Cooper?
First of all, thank you for the report. I think it shows a lot of different statistics amongst the community in Pacifica, and I think it's very thorough in its understanding of at least of the demographics that we have here. One of the questions that I had was the carryover from the previous years. We had, it looks like, a carryover from 2007, 2014 of about half the need that we have now. Is that correct?
Certainly, it's correct that the city provided the framework for housing development to occur, but it's correct that the development in the prior 8-year period did not meet the identified need for the community. Yes.
Okay. So are these needs that you show for the 60 rather, like if I just go to your table, your front table that you have, you show a need of extremely low, 60 units, and then if I was to look at the 2007, 2014, there was 32 units needed. Is the need that we currently have for the 28, or is it the entire 60 is the need based on the overall parameters?
I'm not sure exactly whether it's cumulative carried forward from the prior period, but I can find out before we bring this back again.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah. The other element that that I kind of knew, but going forward, was I thought that the age statistic was very unique in the fact that in 1970 our median age was 23.6, in 2010 we're at 41.5. So our community appears to be getting older. From these statistics, it also looks like the seniors are the majority of the people who are in need of affordable housing within the community. And I know that we've had some interest in some development back in the valley. Has that gone any farther as far as you know? I know that there was some outreach spoken back here, but I didn't see anything specific to other types of outreach.
Yeah, I agree, Commissioner. The need is striking when you look at the statistics in terms of seniors as a group, and then combined with the fact that many of them have disabilities, many of them also have decreasing or very low incomes. It sort of hits all of the factors of identifying a real housing need. If specifically you're talking about the project on Odstat, I believe it had been approved and then the development entitlements expired, and I believe there's a rekindled interest. There's some new property owners or potential purchasers of that site that are interested in continuing with a very similar type of development.
And then I did have a question looking at the differences between the market rents and the availability or the amount that an extremely low income person was able to pay. I think it was $574 per month. How is that differential made up typically within the environment? Is that done by a voucher, or is that done by a grant, or are those units offered to those people for that amount?
Are you specifically referring to like a Section 8 program?
Yes, there's some statistics on what we currently have available and what the market rents are, and then there's some comparison to the extremely low income people and what they can afford, and there's a huge differential there. I mean, it's almost like unfathomable that someone could actually even live here. How is that delta made up? Is the city provide some of those services, or is it out of the Section 8 program?
Sure. So in many cases, sadly, the result is what you said, where people can't afford to live here, and that's part of the problem, unfortunately, and that's why affordable housing is so important. There's many people that have to double, triple, quadruple, or more with roommates or multiple families that live together to afford those kinds of rents. In some cases, people that are fortunate enough to get into the very limited availability of subsidized housing programs, they may participate in one of the programs, which is the Section 8 rental subsidy. And so those individuals, their income is assessed, and then they're only expected to pay 30% of their income for the rent, and the rest of it up to market rate in that Section 8 development is paid by the federal government.
Great. That's great information. And I assume that we have programs that lead our citizens to some of those programs?
Sure, and those are some of the ongoing activities that we as the city, as well as our partner groups, we need to make sure on a continuing basis they're aware of that, where to refer people, who's in charge of those programs, who qualifies, and that's what we plan to do as part of the housing element.
Great. One encouraging thing that I did read through the report was the fact that the current people who are Section 8 have reapplied, and they are dedicated to providing for the seniors. It seems to me that we would certainly benefit, as we did for this site, for the library, and we really pushed that through, and I know there was some money to explore that development, but to do the same thing for something like this, where we're able to go and do some foreseeing and do some clearances for a project that would provide some of the needs that I see in here. But I thought overall it was very insightful for me, so thank you.
Great, thank you. And if I could clarify, Commissioner Cooper, are you suggesting that perhaps one of the activities that the city could undertake, one of the action programs, is to identify sites with willing property owners and try to do sort of a pre-review or pre-approval similar to the
I think that, it is beneficial, not that I want to dictate use of a certain areas of land for certain development, but I certainly think as a community, we have identified certain projects. We mentioned the Odstad property. To attract somebody to build affordable housing here, it would seem that you would need to do that study. How close is that property to hospitals? How close is that property to urgent care? How do people get in? How do people get out? And really attract those businesses here to Pacifica. That property is in the sunshine, and that's what people want to see. So it just seems to me that we could do a little bit more and spend some money, a little bit of money to attract people and attract businesses to the community. So.
Sure, okay, yeah, we can take a look at that. There are communities, it takes certain resources in order to put that framework together, but there are communities that do that as part of their housing element, and it certainly reduces some barriers to potential developers. It shows, hey, this city's interested, they've done some of the legwork, we can save time, we can save money, and we can really get the project rolling, so I'll take a look at that.
And then the last comment I had was that there was a reference to the mobile home park as far as providing affordable housing. Is that the case anymore with what's going on as far as the increase in rents?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and analyze again. I didn't have sort of by unit.
It's brand new, yeah.
Rent information to compare and see whether they were affordable or not, but even still, with the rent increase, many of those units are going for much lower than a comparable market rate rent starting today, due to that long-term rent affordability that they've had over a number of years.
Great. Well, with that, I'll let my fellow commissioners ask questions.
Can I speak? Yeah, go ahead. Because I wanted to piggyback on what he had to say, because it shows that the 2012 market rent was $1,778 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I'm not sure where that number came from, but that in 2012 was totally inaccurate. Right now, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath would probably rent for $2,900 to $3,000 a month. 2 bedrooms are, even 2-bedroom apartments are $2,800. So the rents in here are so far off. Also, right before I left, I did the average house price for the last 365 days, and it was $725,000 for a house and $515,000 for condo townhouses. That's the prior 365 days.
Sure.
So that, of course, the numbers can't be current.
Right.
Because even if I did it for the last month, would be totally different than what I did for the last year. Mm-hmm. But it was a long term.
Sure, so I'm happy if you have access to those other data sources. I do. More than happy to take a look. One issue that we're sort of bound by, of course, you mentioned, is the trailing aspect of a lot of this comprehensive data, as well as this data package for many of these tables was county-wide, and so we would lose some consistency with and comparability between the counties in terms of changing each table to meet a certain data source. But I'd be happy to take a look and see if it does make more sense. If it was drastically off, we don't want to have inaccurate data, certainly.
Also, the availability of second residential units. There are a lot of neighborhoods that are just prime for second residential units. Fairmont, a lot of Park Pacifica. It does say that they would limit them to 25% of the area, so it's hard to, that's a pretty good number, though.
It's a very large number. I'm not aware of any place in the city that's even getting close to that.
That's a pretty good number.
That aspect of the second unit development standards hasn't been a constraint, but there certainly, is an argument to be made about changing, tweaking, or totally rewriting some of the standards. If the city is interested in really being very much pro second unit, there's certainly a balance with existing neighborhoods that are primarily one unit in character, but their second units are often seen as a way to produce a lot of extra units, and the conditions need to be right for that to be possible.
They do have a lot
Make
of
it cost
parking
prohibitive.
restrictions.
Right. And so there are a couple aspects of our current standards that we do need to update to conform with state law, but that's not to say the commission couldn't advocate going further to make the standards much more permissive. So if that's something the commission would like to see or the community would like to see, we definitely need to hear about that.
Okay.
Do you know, why don't you, if you have any other comments or questions, we'll just make it your turn right now.
Oh, I had a lot of comments. I'll move on.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Commissioner Evans. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, first of all, for an outstanding report. I know there was a lot of work involved in this. So, as I said before, the poor new guy on the block, you know, so. You answered one of my first questions was about the number 413 came up, and as I understood your statement here, was you'd identified 434 possible places here in the city. Is that correct?
424 places where the general plan maximum density would allow that number of units.
Okay, on the project summary on page, what page it is, it just says discussion. There's a 434 total housing units over the, what number is that? It's like page 2, very first on the backside. And in paragraph, it says number 2, key items for consideration.
That's a result of an addition error on one of my two calculations, either the one in my notes here or the one in the table, but the figures that are in the table identifying the sites in the draft document, those individual numbers are correct, so I apologize if I made...
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to understand the difference in the numbers. So it is 424, not 434 then?
You know, I don't want to misrepresent. I'd have to go through and add it.
It's one of the two.
Let's pretend it's the
Around
434.
Yeah,
so we don't
got it.
undersell what we're doing.
Got it. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that. The next question, and it's more of a thought on my part, how the population has decreased since the 2000 census, you know, in that 10 years. We went from 38,390 to 37,234, which actually put us down lower than the 1990 specs. And in the projection, I know these figures came from the county, correct?
They came from the group called CCAG. It's a agglomeration of different county governments, cities, and they worked together and they had a consultant prepare these statistics.
Well, I really question, because they have projected for 2020, in the next, well now, 6 years, a 6% increase, and I'm having a tough time. We were minus 3% for 2010, and I know that makes a whole big difference on the number we're looking for, so I really question that, and like I said, that's only my own feeling. We could be at 6%, we could be even higher, but the past figures haven't shown that.
Sure. If you could, Commissioner, if you could give me a specific page or table number.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's table 2-1 for the projected population growth.
Okay.
On page 21.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to keep in mind, some of these are done at a more macro level, identifying regional Bay Area growth trends, and so some of them may not, you know, be able to be generalized sort of to a community that's unique like Pacifica.
Right.
When they're allocating regional growth, they say, well, this community has this number of population, the region's supposed to grow by this percent, everyone gets an equal share. I think that we do a better job identifying allocations of the regional housing numbers, the RENA, because that's done at the sub-region level with CCAG, with people that know San Mateo County. They understand the nuances of each community, but I agree that that 6% growth projection is quite optimistic, and even if we built all of those housing units and more, I don't think that we would hit that. So
Yeah, just because we go from 2% to minus 3%, and then they project it in 10 years plus 6%. And then the next, for 2030, it shows 1%. So, I just question where they came up with these figures, as my previous commissioner was talking about. Okay, I think I only had one other. Now, on page 69, the potential housing development sites, the map. I've seen this map before because I think it came before us one time before, and there's a few spots I remember because I brought up one the last time that's not even on here anymore. So I'm guessing that things have been updated in the past several years. But the one question I have is, I know for this site right here that we've talked quite a bit about for development, it's not even listed in here. Is there a reason for that?
There is, Commissioner. That general plan amendment and local coastal plan amendment are still going through review with the Coastal Commission. And so we have to be certain that we can commit to the city's development regulations allowing housing development at the sites we've identified, and to commit to a site that hasn't been vetted and approved by the Coastal Commission would be inappropriate in the housing element. That may be something if it's significant in terms of the number of units that can be produced, and if it's determined to be necessary because we lose these other sites for other reasons. Those are the types of reasons that you would come back with an amendment to the housing element sometime during the 8-year planning period to update due to significant changes and new conditions.
I appreciate that because I know it says potential, so that's the idea of it's possible. But I know where we're at, or somewhat where we're at in the process for this place, so, we can't literally count on anything. I understand that. It just kind of threw me off a little bit as potential, but yet it's not even mentioned, but I understand, so.
We did think about putting it in there, but...
Oh, okay.
As Kristen mentioned, it's going to still through the approval process.
Right.
And the quarry is also not in there.
Yeah, because that one requires voter approval for residential, and so therefore, again, we can't assure that the city's regulations would allow housing to be developed in that location, and therefore it would be inappropriate to commit to that in the housing element.
I think for right now, that's the only questions I really had. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Commissioner Evans, okay. Welcome, Commissioner Neblin. You're going to have a little bit of time to, what we're doing right now is just going through first the commissioners with respect to the questions or comments we may have about the planning, about the housing element draft, and after that we'll throw it to the audience, to the public. So right now we're on Commissioner Vaterlos, who's already had a chance, but she has another chance.
I'm okay.
You're okay? Okay. Do you want a couple of minutes to get yourself, or you?
I think I'll get my bearings.
Okay.
We let some other people talk right now.
All right. So I will go. Yeah, thank you for this, for the preparation and for the presentation, Christian. It's been great. Commissioner Evans brought up a really interesting point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the number that's driving so much of our calculations here is it the 6% number? Like how to accommodate for that target growth?
Not exactly. It's projected regional population growth is one important factor, but there are factors like estimated economic growth, population demographics in terms of age, assessments of disabilities and things of that sort that all factor in. I don't know exactly the formula or the rigor that was put into it or the exact methodology. I mean, it's done and there's very specialized staff at the regional level, regional planners that do that sort of thing. We sort of see the tail end of that and have a little bit of opportunity to comment on it, to tweak it. But really, these figures, the housing allocation, it is somewhat driven top down, and we kind of at the end say, okay, now deal with this number, and we do the best we can to plan for it and say, okay, of this number, what types of housing do we need to provide due to our unique local needs?
Right. So is one of the factors that's considered available buildable land?
I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a factor that's considered through the regional allocation process. I think there's a function of that in terms of if there's lots of undeveloped land, the city may have a lower population, and therefore the incremental growth on a lower population is a lower number. But I don't think it's a direct consideration, and it's sort of up to us at the local level to figure out how to accommodate this. If we intend to leave all these sites vacant and preserve open space, do we then densify to meet this need? But there's no way of getting out of this need. That's what's stuck, and that's what's set. That's what we have to plan for.
Okay. In your view, I know it sounds like we only met 50% of our target in the prior 7-year period. Do you have a sense of why that was? Was it economic conditions? Was it the financial crisis?
I mean, my personal opinion is there's a lot of factors. Certainly the housing market and the overall economy from 2007 to 2014. Most of that period was not sort of get the bulldozers running, let's build a lot of housing, when housing values were so much lower relative to their historic values. I think specifically in Pacifica, the lack of easy, affordable, cheap buildable sites certainly constrained housing development. Most of the easy stuff, if not all the easy stuff's done. And so these sites now are particularly challenging, slopes, environmental constraints, and other limiting factors. So they're not necessarily setting the conditions for a lot of housing to be constructed without additional assistance or additional incentives.
So the low-hanging fruit is gone.
That's my opinion, certainly. And I think a lot of what you're seeing here is we're relying on redevelopment of commercial sites with mixed use to intensify them to meet this housing need. And so that's not something Pacifica's encountered a lot in the recent past in terms of development. So that will be a particular change if the commission supports and the public supports this plan that we've put forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Nevlin,
Thank you. I guess, and again, it's already been asked, I apologize. And one thing that caught my eye is that looks like we've got an allocation, if I'm understanding correctly, of we've got housing sites that have been identified for 434 total housing units.
Yes.
According to the report. And our allocation is 413 units. So I'm interested in whether or not the sites themselves, maybe the sites are not necessarily determinative of it, but sort of the alignment of the identified sites to the, particularly the affordability of the various units that are allocated to us.
Sure.
And whether or not there are sites that are zoned in a way that would allow us to sort of meet those affordability goals.
Right. So you touched on, I think, two very key points. So what we have to do on an aggregate basis is provide buildable sites, whether they be vacant or whether they be allowed to densify in terms of the general plan land use designation, to provide a sufficient number of sites based on the allowable per acre density and the site size. Not every one of those sites will be built to maximum density. We're aware of that, but we've provided that possibility. And so that's our responsibility in that regard. In terms of the zoning, in some of these instances, and we didn't necessarily call them out, but the zoning is listed. The general plan designation is the guiding designation that we are relying upon. And if a developer wants to come in and build, the city is going to have to effectuate that zone change to accommodate that general plan designation to allow the housing, because we committed that site in our housing element. And so that's one important thing to note. In some cases, the zoning would allow fewer units to be built. And so we need to embrace that if we move forward with these identified sites, there could be petitions to change the zoning at some point. And then lastly, in terms of the affordability component, are these sites suitable for affordable housing? Some of these are lower density. They're going to result in detached or attached single-family homes, condos, townhomes perhaps. But what's really important is these sites, in particular the mixed-use sites, the commercial sites, those are going to have to be mixed use, and they're more than likely going to be apartments in many cases, and that's where we get our greatest chance for affordability. And so the density does allow that, and it does provide for the provision of affordable housing in a great number of these sites.
Excellent, thank you.
Great.
I have 3 more questions if I could.
Go for it.
It deals with the action plans that I see on the backside of the brochure. On page 89, there's an action plan for reducing potential loss of life and property due to seismic, and we don't currently have an ordinance that mandates any seismic upgrades, but what are the types of things in Pacifica are we looking at? Are we looking at attaching homes to foundations? Are we talking something a little more substantial than that? I don't quite understand what this ordinance goes to.
Sure. And I'm not an expert on seismic retrofitting, so I may have to defer to the building official, and we can bring that specific information to the next hearing. But as many people in the public are aware, the soft-story buildings, those with first stories that have lots of openings that aren't reinforced, like garages, windows, doors. Think of a first-story commercial storefront with large windows, or a house that may be 2 or 3 stories, and the first story, the biggest opening is a garage door. Without proper reinforcing and structural improvements, in the event of a severe earthquake, those are not strong enough to support the weight of the stories above. If you look at the built environment in San Francisco, it'll be immediately apparent to you the types of places that they're talking about, those 4, 5, 6-story apartment buildings with a first-story commercial space, for example. Those are very, very much threatened if they're not properly reinforced. I think there potentially are fewer sites and potentially lower severity in Pacifica because of our lower population and housing density and heights overall, but still there probably are important sites that need to be reinforced. But if you're curious about the specific measures, I'd have to get back to the commission.
Yeah, just the scope of what that, what that action plan really involves. I mean, what is the city envisioning, or what should we be envisioning as far as implementing some sort of city ordinance, and how far would that go and overreaching? It's not so burdensome upon a homeowner, but certainly if they're going to do a retrofit, that they take into account the new codes, and to what extent does that really mean? The other questions I had was on page 106 and 107. These are really unique zoning ordinances, and I wanted to know why we were considering these. There's 2. One was for the boarding houses, for farm worker housing and permitted for use, and also on page 107, which was to allow farm worker housing on agricultural areas. I didn't quite know what agricultural areas we have in Pacifica that this ordinance would go towards. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to do ordinances, and it seems that potentially there are more important ordinances to pass than something like this that may not even apply to Pacifica. So does this apply to our community?
It does. These touch on areas that are of great importance at the state level when you think of California being such an agricultural state. And these housing laws come down from Sacramento with input from stakeholders and groups with needs all across the state. We do have locations in Pacifica that are zoned agricultural. Are they working farms? No. But we need to ensure that if at some point in the future they did become functional farms, that there would be an ability for those farm operators to house their workers. And so we do have a requirement, if I understand correctly, to amend our A zoning at a minimum to allow higher density of farm worker housing, greater number of occupants without requiring discretionary review. Now, the action program number 14 on page 106, I'm not aware of a requirement for us to do that, but it is something that is mentioned and suggested by housing and farm worker housing advocates. So if that's not appropriate and the commission's not comfortable and the public doesn't identify a need, we could remove the action program, probably without great detriment, number 14. But number 15, I believe we need to keep it.
No, that explains a lot, thank you. I was kind of wondering when that was in here, not knowing that we really had a need for it, but if it's a mandate, certainly we should have it within our ordinance system. That's all I had, thanks.
Okay, I think it's time to open it up to the questions for the public. If there are any, there's not required, but I'll just go around that way and call on folks. And when I call on you, just state your name, okay? Tom Clifford.
I don't even have to state my name, you did it for me. Hi, I'm Tom Clifford. I do have a few questions and a couple of suggestions. I'll start with the suggestions first because we want to get things moving along. In terms of the second units, I would strongly suggest that you get rid of the parking requirement. Currently, most homes can't build a second unit simply because it requires an additional parking space that they have no room for. So they're prohibited from doing that. and we are losing a lot of potential very low and low-income units simply because we've got this parking rule attached to the housing. And my second suggestion would be for second units only to, instead of measuring the height of the unit from the highest to the lowest point, you go from highest to highest. That would open it up for people who live on downslopes to actually build a second unit. Right now, the only way they can do that is if they come to the Planning Commission for a variance. It's unlikely they would get it. And they're already working with a very difficult site that's going to cost them more to build on to start with. So they're already at a disadvantage. You shouldn't disadvantage them more by requiring them to go from the highest to the lowest in terms of measurements. And then my question is, on page 69, at the bottom, number 10, Sanchez Library is commercial, and it's not a public facility?
It is.
It should have been changed when they approved the property, that it would have been approved, the general plan would have been changed to show it as a public facility, because it is, it's a library. And two, following the logic that I was hearing before about not counting the housing on this site, how can you count housing on a library site when you don't know that you're ever going to be able to close that library? And you're talking about 60 of the units here.
So to answer your first question, in the general plan, it is designated as library, but if you look at it, it's immediately adjacent to other commercial areas. So projecting into the future, should that site be closed, we identified that it would be most appropriate as a commercial site, and there's no prohibition on the city's land use regulations for that housing development to occur like there would be at this site, subject to coastal commission review that's ongoing. So that's...
And the bond issue from voters for the library itself. I mean, that's another restriction.
Potentially, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else? Now's your chance to pipe in. Okay.
Thank you very much. Do we introduce ourselves?
Yes.
Okay, Julie Rexel, former public servant, citizen at large here. The reason I've come is because I had some questions about, I had several questions, starting with, you know, naturally having lived here for almost 30 years and being involved as an observer and as a participant in a number of different challenging development sites. I see some that are like, for example, Hacienda, Court Place. You know, some of these are very steep properties. I mean, if this is the one that borders on Manor or whatever the road is that goes up at the top of the hill, that's an extremely steep site. It also has a creek running through it. There are, well, obviously the Zebro site is also very steep. So I'm just, right from the get-go, I'm just kind of mentioning those two sites as sites of concern with regard to the steepness of those sites and also access to them. But also, I had some questions just about, and I'll start with, there are just 4 points that I kind of jotted down as I was looking at this. My first question is, did the recommendation to CK to use the new number, the new total, which was adding what wasn't built the last go-round and adding it to the new number, come from the Planning Commission or the City Council? How did CK get that number? Was there a resolution or something like that, or something that went before the council?
I apologize, I don't know how the allocation was derived by CK.
Okay. So because I just think it seems to me that if we weren't able to build the total allocation that was provided to us previously, to just simply take the number that we were short and then add it to the new allocation is kind of a simplistic calculation. And I just hate to see us put a number out there that's going to drive our process, you know, or drive our planning process that hasn't maybe more thoughtfully been arrived at. So I'm just putting that out there to you. All right. Looking at the numbers regarding the change in population over time and how it's actually gotten smaller, which may be part of the aging boomers whose children have moved out of town now, who were here in the 90s and after. But the rate of building units, I think, is directly related to the extent to which the community values the unique natural beauty of the community. And I think that that's also, when we're in this regional process with CCAG and with San Mateo County, we are, and I'm not saying this in a kind of elitist way or anything, but the fact is that we're a unique community. And the community has come forward over the years to really and demonstrated how much it values that uniqueness. And so I think that, one thing you have to worry about when you say you're unique is you arouse resentment, among others maybe, or something like that. So I don't want to say it in a way that puts us above. It's an unusual environment compared to the rest of San Mateo County, of course leaving out the coast and Half Moon Bay. And so we have to be particularly attentive to each one of these sites. I mean, these are kind of the remaining sites now. And there are issues. Let's see. I also had some confusion with the language, and it was in the bottom of page 26 or 31, depending, I was reading it online. So, because at one point there was a table that showed that Pacifica had more affordable and lower priced units per capita, maybe it was, compared to other cities in the county. But then again, it later talks about how it's unaffordable, that the homes are unaffordable to most people, which I also kind of understand. But I don't know, I found that a confusing set of statements. And my last question, thank you all. I'm wondering when these site-specific numbers were vetted by the Coastal Commission. I know it was mentioned that these numbers had been vetted with the Coastal Commission, and I'm just curious about when that happened.
Sure, so to answer your last question, there hasn't been a specific vetting in this case, but these general plan land use designations were reviewed and vetted during the city's local coastal land use plan approval process, and so they were reflective of what the Coastal Commission's already seen.
No, is that fairly, forgot about it, but do you recall when that was by any chance?
Well, the city's current general plan dates from 1980. I don't know if the local coastal land use plan is older or newer than that. I suspect it's slightly newer, but not much newer.
Okay.
The city's undergoing a comprehensive update to both documents currently, but it's quite dated, but that's the law of the land in Pacifica for now.
Right. I just think that's the Coastal Commission, will probably have something to say about some of these assumptions.
Yeah, again, project level approvals with actual number of units built, there's no way to predict that. Environmental constraints, financial constraints, architectural constraints, all of those things may complicate development to the maximum density, but our obligation as the city is to provide sites that could allow that level of development.
Just a quick question, follow-up question on that. It's all So if we make if we go ahead, this was approved as it is, but it's not possible to build it based on maybe Coastal Commission's response to it. I just wonder if it isn't better to get a sense of, to set realistic numbers. I understand why there may be pressure on Pacifica to develop more, but I'm not sure that may turn out, if this is the time to really set the numbers at a realistic place, I think. That way down the road, we'll have less problems. I mean, this is a moment to do that. Thank you.
If I could just maybe touch on two more things. First, once you have a chance to maybe go home and reference the document again, if you could send to the city, or send to me, the planning department, the specific internal contradiction that you think exists.
Okay.
I'd like to take another look. I don't want the document to be confusing and internally contradictory. What I think you're referring to is a section that talks about Pacifica has a more affordable housing stock than the rest of San Mateo County, but that it yet remains quite unaffordable for many people currently. But I definitely want to remove any of those internal contradictions. And then, as far as your comment about the two sites, the Hacienda Court site and the Zebros site, we identified sites where the general plan designation allows it. If those aren't sites that we should be focusing affordable housing developers to look at, the trade-off is identifying other sites that can accommodate those units. And so if that's the direction from the community and from the commission, we need to hear that. But the trade-off to make up, let's just say 20 or 30 units is to identify potentially another commercial location that could accommodate a higher density on a smaller footprint. So those are the trade-offs that we need to hear from you as community members of what you're willing to accept, what you'd like to see. We'll preserve these sloped areas in the trade-off of a more intensive commercial orientation. So
That's great. Yeah, I'm just trying to make this realistic, what you were saying.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Julie. Those were really thoughtful comments. Just one follow-up on is the technical word for what she's saying the RHNA? Is that the number?
Yes.
RHNA? I mean, it does seem like that's the number that's driving all of this. Where's the right forum to discuss whether we've got it right or not? Is that right here?
I mean, there's a quite lengthy statistical, machination that happens at the regional level. Local governments, I think we're represented by CCAG as a member city. They have a chance to advocate for us and say, well, that's not appropriate for San Mateo County. We're not actually going to grow at that rate, or we're going to grow differently, change our numbers. And then there are opportunities for individual cities to appeal. I wasn't with the city when this appeal period for this RHNA took place. I don't know who reviewed that and determined, well, there's no justifiable basis to appeal that. And largely there isn't. I mean, if you read through the catalog of cities that appeal, it's not on a we're different, we don't want to grow basis. It's you made a factual error, or there's not sufficient sites to accommodate that number, it's impossible mathematically. Those are the most common types of reasons that appeals are granted by the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, which is our regional group that does the allocations, and at the sub-regional level, we're represented by CCAG, the City County Association of Governments for San Mateo County. So, long answer, short answer is there is an appeal period. It's long gone for this RHNA, but we can certainly be more proactive going to the next cycle to make sure the commission's informed into sort of more of these calculations before we just come with a number.
Okay, great. In other words, we're stuck with a number.
We're stuck with the number unless the city wants to fight in court for years and years and probably lose and spend a lot of money, like some cities do. But over time, more and more realize that's not the time to fight this. You need to get involved earlier and show why you can't grow for whatever reason.
But just to clarify though, it sounded like you were also saying that the 413 number doesn't strike you as especially unwarranted. Or did I misunderstand?
I don't think I made that characterization. I said that's the number that we planned off of. I didn't put any sort of analysis into whether that's important, or excuse me, appropriate, because I didn't feel that we have an opportunity now to appeal it. And it's my job as a staff member to plan off of this number that's been vetted in a lengthy regional process.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me. Can I say something? Ask a question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll move back to the audience.
Yeah, just for everybody's reference sake, what is the repercussions from the state? And I've heard this before, but I want everybody to understand it. If we do not comply with this.
There are a number of consequences. The most immediate, potentially, is if a housing developer wants to come in on a site that we said we were going to take action on but didn't, they potentially could have by right approval of their project, so bypass the commission, bypass the city council, go get a building permit. And so that's one consequence of not properly implementing our housing element. Another is we go from an 8-year planning cycle to a 4-year planning cycle if we don't provide an adequate number of sites for housing development, which is hugely detrimental and hugely costly in terms of staff time, money spent on the document, using commission time, and really who can plan large investments, large housing developments on a 4-year cycle. It's difficult enough to put all those pieces together, on an 8-year horizon. And then, maybe even more frightening is the prospect of lawsuits from housing advocacy groups that are very vigilant over what local governments are doing and whether or not they're complying with state law. A city where I worked previously was involved in litigation for a long time because it felt that it didn't have to provide what state law said it did, and the court was not compelled by the argument, and they ultimately ended up doing what they should have been doing previously, but after great expense. So those are the consequences that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Commissioner Evans. Right here.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here at the very beginning, and I'm new to looking at this, but I'm curious about I know that our homelessness rate in Pacifica has gone up 700% or more in the last few years. And I'm wondering if increase in homelessness was taken into account in the numbers that were given as a requirement for providing housing. Is that part of the process?
Yeah, I don't suspect...
Getting those numbers?
I don't suspect that there's specific allocations for homeless persons in that arena figure. What the housing element is required to address is the homeless need and ensuring that the city's policies allow emergency shelters and transitional shelters to help those persons that are homeless and those families that are homeless, get them immediately off the street and then into programs to address whatever the underlying causes of their homelessness, whether that be substance abuse, unemployment, a child with special needs or an adult with special needs that can't provide for the family. So we need to ensure that we allow construction and operation of those kinds of immediate shelters for homeless persons. But if someone's homeless, they're not going to go from being homeless to being able to afford any sort of apartment, let alone something that is at market rate. So.
Right, but it does speak to the pressure for affordable units.
It absolutely does. I mean, there are people that are homeless because they can't afford an apartment that's available to them, and that's a very tragic and sad situation, and that's what this document strives to begin to address, or at least put the conditions in place to where interested parties can address them.
Thank you.
And to your point on the drastic increase, I mean, that statistic jumped out at me. I don't suspect homelessness shot up 700%. I suspect that the effort continues to improve to identify homeless people and to fully understand the extent of the problem. And so I think over time that delta will level out and we'll have a real sense for what the homelessness is in the community and be able to provide for that need.
Thank you.
My name's Gloria Stofan, and I've come to the City Council at previous times, but I also remember several months ago in the Tribune, the top 10 concerns, and one of our council people, Mike O'Neill, said affordable housing was one of their issues, and the lack of it in Pacifica. And I'm so glad to hear that that word is being tossed around here in hearing the Planning Commission. it is part of the housing element and the mandate law for you to provide some type of affordable housing or for all incomes. The need for it is really critical here, particularly in San Mateo County. San Francisco, if you've read the newspapers or on the internet, is supposedly one of the higher, or the top place in terms of rents and buying homes. But San Mateo comes in pretty high. And a lot of the rents in particular, I'm not even thinking of buying a new home. I couldn't even afford my home now in Pacifica if I tried to buy it. But our backbone, our workers, our teachers in particular, particularly when they're starting out with in a career of teaching, they can't afford. Some of them obviously are either still living with their parents, or there's 4 or 5 individuals living in a house that maybe is meant for just 1 or 2 people. It's becoming very critical. And this is so important for this to be addressed, and particularly in this housing element that goes through. And maybe I just, because I'm a private individual here, think that, okay, this is a process, we get it done, and I know you've all worked hard. I have seen it where groups have come and given input. But sometimes I feel like, okay, it's sent to Sacramento and that's about it. And so I'm just really wanting to make sure that this well, not maybe, this needs to be followed through, and with fingers crossed, it'll get done. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. One follow-up question with that comment. I've seen special, it's not like low-income housing, but it's housing that's designated for city workers.
Workforce housing.
Workforce housing. Is this the right place for that? To be discussed in the
I'm not,
housing element?
Commissioner, I'm not familiar specifically with the type of housing you're referring to. I apologize. There's nothing in this that says you need to build a certain type of housing. The main development aspect of this is, here are sites that can accommodate this density, and the city will review project level applications to construct certain types of housing. So within this framework of density, number of units and so forth, someone could pursue and be an advocate for a workforce type housing development, and provided it met all of the other development requirements that the city has, certainly they could construct such a development. And if that's something that you would like staff to analyze, because there is a key need for that, we could do our best to attempt and figure out what types of sites are appropriate for workforce housing, what type of density do they need to pencil out to have a reasonable chance of being constructed and developed and that sort of thing, and ensure that we have sites that are appropriate for that, if that's important to the commission.
I like the idea. I'm looking, I have more questions. Yes?
Frank Erbacher. One of the things that I know messes up all cities is the requirement for increase the density is a requirement for parking and transportation. Now, this city in particular has pretty limited public transportation. Does the general plan, does that, in housing, can it refer to an increase in the push for this city versus pushing the county for more and better transportation alternatives so that we can increase density without cramming cars in every place? And of course, the other thing is zoning changes to allow, in a formerly landscaped area because of the drought situation, there's added parking there. But that's small. The main multiple modes of transportation, I think, is an issue that I don't know if you can tie to making your housing goals by allowing densification of your single-family and townhouse units, and still not have the parking congestion that goes with that.
So I'm sorry, sir, I didn't quite understand the second question, but the first question, transit, of course, is always a challenge. You know, if you look at best practices of, you know, new urbanism or affordable housing, it's always put it in a transit-rich area. Well, you know, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. You know, the transit provider is not going to provide transit unless there's that base for ridership. And a lot of people say they'll ride transit, but don't necessarily follow through until it's at a level of service that they can rely upon, it's regular enough, it's not overcrowded, and so forth. So, you know, if you wanted my professional opinion, I feel the city needs to complete the densification first, if that's what it chooses to do, and then really advocate for transit investment based on a demonstrated population that's there to ride the transit, and really vet it that way. I don't think that you can justify, and I don't think that Samtrans or any other transit provider is going to invest significantly in increasing service levels without a foreseeable population or density increase that will actually utilize the transit. That's my personal opinion. I think there are elements in this document that would potentially result in high enough densities where transit increases could work out. Now, is that going to be regular scheduled bus service, or is it going to be shuttle service during peak commute periods or something else? I don't know, but those are things that I think the city expects and would like to see and would advocate for if and when we're seeing housing density at the level it needs to be to support that, because that's a very important component, absolutely.
In particular, I'm just arguing for the densification with a statement that, for instance, the city in the past had its own little bus system to handle stuff which was taken over by Samtrans, and I'm not sure that that is as easy and as productive as the little puny muni was way back when, but I didn't use it then. I did use the Samtrans and so on as part of my career. Going to work, but use that as a method to increase densification of single-family dwellings and the multiple family, higher density like townhouses. So you don't build more parking garages, you encourage the use of the transportation system.
And so are you advocating for reducing parking requirements as part of these multi-unit developments from the current standard?
Yes, as well as within the single families. Second units, you know, how can you provide the parking?
And then to your point, sir, about the landscaped areas, were you advocating for allowing more lot coverage and
yes,
minimizing those landscaped areas to allow for building more housing?
Both, housing and parking.
Thank you. Okay.
Sam.
Yeah, I think you haven't spoken yet. The gentleman in the green?
Yeah. Hi, Sam Casillas from Pedro Point. First, I'd like to thank the commissioners for having this open session to hear from the public. And then Christian, I know it seems like you're on the spot and you're supposed to be, you know, an oracle for all this information. So just recognizing that you may not have all the answers. Thank you. So with that, though, I do have one question starting out with the potential housing development sites. The reference in there was from Diet and Dieta for 2008, 2009. So did that come from what was the general plan update, that information, or?
So I believe you're referring to the map showing the housing sites, and it's my understanding that that resulted from a research effort that was done ahead of the general plan, the draft general plan development. It was an existing conditions study, and so using a methodology of sites that were underutilized relative to land value compared to structure value, identifying vacant sites. The consultant that put this map together identified those sites as meeting a certain threshold for appropriateness for housing development. And so that's how I believe that this document, or this map was developed.
Okay, so did they take any of the environmental conditions into consideration at that time? Or just looked at, oh, this is an open field, great place to put some houses?
Yeah, it's my understanding, and perhaps Lee can supplement this, I believe that if there was a known, obvious environmental or geological reason that housing was infeasible, I believe they ruled out the site. Now, project level, species level conditions at a site, I don't think that they did that level of review when creating this map.
Well, even with that, so then, thank you for answering that question, then this is going to be more a comment. Even with that, then, I'm extremely alarmed at looking at some of these specific sites and how exactly these sites were vetted, and then now we're promising that we're actually going to be able to build these many units in Pacifica and then be held accountable to it. And then at the end of all this, at some point, potentially we have to say, oh, we have to put our hands up and our hands are tied and we can't do anything, so we have to put this housing here and we don't have a choice. Well, reality states, and sort of what Julie was stating earlier, we do have a unique set of circumstances here in our environment. I mean, we're ruled by the fact of what is constituted by our coastline and the ever-changing environment. I don't think any of us forgot just, a couple years ago what happened up here in Northern Pacifica with the apartments falling in. And what I see is that we're potentially falling into that situation again, in 3 sites, specifically just obviously because, one, I live near, and a couple others because, it's just alarming. So for example, the Gypsy Hillside area, hillside preservation, I guess that would get knocked down in the situation if we have to, do some density there. But also it's very steep and risky for slide areas. But that's actually at my lower end of concern. The next site that's even a little bit more concerning is the San Pedro Road one, which is, if everybody's familiar, that's the one that's on the east side of the highway along San Pedro Creek, right before you get to the rehabilitation center there. Well, it's right along San Pedro Creek, which obviously is potential flood zone, but also is known as a red-legged frog zone as well. And you're proposing potentially 52 units there. But obviously the one that jumps out the most is the Calson site. Now, the city council, a couple years back, because the whole neighborhood was being misrepresented by one landowner there who wants to sell that property for residential zoning to make a profit, coming to all these types of meetings and saying that this was what even the residents there wanted. We had 2 meetings, and the second one, based on what the city council asked us to do, was vet the process and make sure that we knew what it was that the residents wanted and why. And again, based on the general plan and sort of on the goals and objectives of that, the commercial recreational aspect of what that was is the best strategic value for it. But then once we saw the environmental impact report come out and we started digging into that even more, there is a whole host of environmental issues there. The Diet and Bayetta general plan references, when you look at that area, one of the things is sea level rise in there. So when you actually look at the reference that they have for that, it's Pacific Institute. You look at that for the sea level rise, and it shows that whole field, actually all the way up to my house in Danman, underwater. Now, when you actually look at it within the general plan EIR, inexplicitly, the sea level rise stops at the creek of what they put in. When I asked the old planning director how that was cut off there, essentially the map was manipulated, the sea level rise map was manipulated because they took a source from the Pacific Institute and manipulated it to cut that piece of it off. Now all of a sudden it doesn't show the sea level rise there. It happens. Common sense is if you go in there, it's a cauldron. You see everything emptying into there. Go there now. It's underwater. That whole field is. On top of that, it's a federally designated wetland, and then we have identified red-legged frogs there as well before. It's not buildable, and you're committing 116 units to that site? That's really alarming from the purpose of that this wasn't properly vetted whatsoever, and we don't even see how the public, the Coastal Commission is going to go for that. On top of, we actually frustratingly, after we actually submitted all that and saw what the general plan came back with the housing units in there, that we said, how did this happen when you actually asked us to comment on this area and that you were going to take our comments into consideration? So we had to go out and actually fight against our own tax dollars because of what's going on with the general plan update there. And we got a biology report, we got a legal environmental report, and we got a CEQA expert, all of them stating that it's just not a buildable site. It needs to stay commercial recreational, which is not the point of the commercial part, but the commercial recreational. And there's now a new definition in there that fits more like that, because essentially that's going to get flooded at some point or another, and it's going to return to the environment. It's not a good site for building, and this is the biggest component of the housing element that you have in there for 116 units. This isn't vetted properly. And if we're going to be asked to build on this, what I'm seeing from Gypsy Hill, the Calson property, and the San Pedro Road, that's 192 units that aren't buildable. But the one there in the Calson property at 116 units is the one that's really not buildable at all. And you're committing 116 units there. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I mean, I think we stated before that none of these, all the easily developable parcels are gone. There's going to be problems with each of these lots, and it's a problem because I don't think we have the time right here to sort of evaluate in detail the propriety of placing each of these parcels in. But I mean, it's a fair point that you know, there's issues with some of these properties, and particularly the properties that have been designated with the most potential units.
Certainly, and you know, Lee, Acting Planning Director Lee and I, or Lee Diaz and I, we can certainly consult and figure out whether it is appropriate to continue with that site or at that density. The trade-off being that those units aren't going away, they have to shift someplace else. So again, it comes back to what the commission and what the community is comfortable with in terms of identifying locations that can house a particular number and density of units. So if the guidance from the community and the commission is to densify elsewhere, because there are so few vacant sites to build on, then we can conduct that analysis.
We'll go back and try to find other sites that would accommodate these numbers. But as Christian said, these numbers don't go away. So we have to find sites that potentially could accommodate these numbers.
So yeah, just for the community and the commission alike to understand there's trade-offs, and so we can perhaps provide some alternatives as the public process unfolds, sites that maybe the community feels is more appropriate.
Yes, all the way in the back.
Hi, I have a really quick question. My name's Joanne Gold of the Pedro Point. So I'm listening to all this, and I really don't understand most of the technical details, but I keep hearing this one thing repeated: when do we get to say what the community is comfortable with? Where is that opportunity where it can get enacted on? All I keep hearing, and I've been talking about this issue at city council meetings and all of the various community forums about how we develop our coastal environment properties. And it always is an opportunity to comment with absolutely no action. When do we get to take our comments into action? When is the time for that?
Well, in fairness, I just heard Christian say that, you know, that he was going to be, he and Lee were going to be taking, you know, Sam's comments and into consideration, and you know, the numbers aren't, the requirements aren't going to go away. They've got to get them from somewhere, and so it's in some ways there's no easy solutions. But I did hear Christian say explicitly that they were going to take a look at this. You know,
that's the direction that the commission wants us to. The staff perhaps identify a site that would like better work.
Yeah,
but yes, we'll come forward.
Right.
We have to find sites that are available for potential
Right.
In my response, I mean, the opportunity is continuous. I wish there was a single opportunity, but it sounds like Mr. Casillas and you as well are continue to be engaged, and it's a continuum. It's not a point in time, and so you're absolutely doing the right thing, and you have to keep pressing. Again, this is not a development document. It's identifying sites, and so every one of these will have a specific project level review should someone want to move forward with a project in the future. And so you'll have yet another opportunity. There will be specific environmental analysis related to the impacts from a specific project, and the Planning Commission and or the City Council will have its chance to say yes or no on the merits of that specific project. And so again, this is site-based, but we're here to hear from the commissioners as representatives of the community and from you, what trade-offs do you want? Because again, we have a fixed number we have to deal with, and we have to find out where we're going to put these.
So Christian, a clarification on that then, because on the GPU EIR, we've essentially submitted 100 pages of documentation for that as to why that site isn't it's not environmentally feasible to build on that site. Are you actually able to take the documents that we put in there and then apply them to here, or do we physically have to pull them out of there and then give you those comments as part of the housing element comments? Because I mean, they're all intertwined, right? So if you look at what we submitted for the EIR, for the draft EIR, we have like 100 pages in there that talks about all of the biologic reports. It talks about the CEQA. It talks about the legal status, everything. So are you able to pull that out of there, or do we again have to pull it out and then submit it as part of this? I mean, I know there's a process, so I'm not sure.
I'll take a look. I think we've got
Okay, great. Thanks.
One thing that I'd like to comment on, I have two comments just to address the concerns is, you know, it takes money to explore sites. It takes a lot of staff time to explore sites. It's not as easy as everybody thinks that, hey, we're looking at this one site and we need to do a complete EIR on it. Well, that takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. I think it's really, there are a limited number of resources. You talk about the buses. Well, do you want affordable housing or do you want buses? We don't have enough money for both. So it is, I think, incumbent for everybody to vote for these things. Should you want those services, or should you want to explore those sites, to give the city extra staff time to explore these sites and bring the development here? I think there could be an action plan. I mean, I saw this library pushed really hard as far as trying to clear the way for this library. The same thing can happen for affordable housing. The same thing can happen for developments back in the valley. You know, you address the concerns of particular sites. Well, you know, how much time and effort did you put in through the EIR to go to battle for this because you think it's important? Well, I think the same thing's true with the city. The city does want to develop these sites, but there is a very limited amount of resources that the city can spend to promote these sites and to promote the development and offer what we have to offer here. I mean, I would love to have transportation all around Pacifica and have people take it and everything else, but economically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So, you know, I think as far as action plan is concerned, I would like to see something, like I said before, something particular to the library being here is really, if we're going to look at a site, let's get the community input, let's all identify a site, and let's move forward. Is everybody going to be happy with that site? Probably not. But enough people have to be happy with that site. I would love to see 90-95% of the people be happy with picking a site and moving forward with it. You know, it's just that it's the one or two people who are discomfort with the site that really hold up the process, and you get staggered with that, and you can't move forward with the development. But again, I'd like to see if we have resources, or if you guys are voting for the resources, to get the resources to promote our city and promote these areas for development and really get the community buy-off. I mean, it takes money for these people to come in, and it takes money to get a community together with the city council and with employees to really vet a site, and it all takes just dollars and funds. So I just encourage everybody to vote for their cities.
And keep in mind also that, as Christian has been repeated, that these sites have just been, you know, they've been identified as potentially home, you know, could be built there. However, if there is a proposal at that point that's site-specific, then at that point it will be analyzed if there's any constraints or any environmental issues with it at the time based on that proposal.
I went to the last general plan meeting also, and most of the people who spoke, sorry, it's loud, almost everyone who spoke against something in their neighborhood. So all the people don't want Gypsy Hill who live there, the people don't want the Fish and Bowl who live near there, the people on Pedro Point don't want that parcel. So you're never going to make everybody happy, never. And, you know, it's sad for everybody, but it has to be done.
That people weren't speaking to, though. Why is the concentration and density in the three most sensitive parcels where there is so much public objection, and that's where you got the concentration? It's flipped.
And this is all Pacifica. It's not one neighborhood or another, it's all Pacifica.
Okay, one question, I mean, we've got some more comments. What's our, what is the time constraints for the meeting? I don't even know.
I have no life, so.
Speak for yourself. Okay.
It's at your discretion, Mr. Chairman.
We don't have a regular meeting, so.
Okay.
Usually we have a regular meeting, we have to cut it, but we don't.
Right, all right. Well, I have until 7:45 personally. But we've got time for some more questions.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just quickly, I mean, this is not a public hearing. There's no action going to be taken. If you have to step out, as long as another commissioner is willing to take control of the meeting, we can proceed in that fashion as well.
Superb. Okay. You've spoken yet, already, Tom, but the lady next to you has not yet. So, lady in the orange.
My name's Ellen Hay, and I want to add my voice to the dire need for affordable housing in Pacifica. And I urge you to study and see every opportunity that there could be affordable housing. It just makes me really sad when I see $4 million houses going up on Fassler, and the kids that are growing up here can't afford to live here. They're moving away, they can't afford the rent. And I think that's probably why in the 70s there were, I think you said the median age was in the 20s, and now it's in the 40s, because everybody moves away, they can't afford to live here.
Thank you for that comment. Tom.
Thank you. I actually have 3 potential sites that could absorb some of the housing if it had to be moved from, say, the property on Pedro Point. One would be allowing mixed use, additional mixed use at Eureka Square. You could put housing up above the buildings that are there. 2 would be the park and ride that's across from the Safeway. That could be developed into a combination plaza, visitors serving on the ground floor, either offices or housing above. You could do as much as 3 stories there. And then Safeway, the whole Safeway complex, the Lindemar complex, could be redeveloped with additional housing on top of it. So you could put a lot of housing in those 3 places, more than you need for the whole city.
And Park Mall? Park Mall?
Park Mall also would work. So you have sites that are already developed that could have the density increased. One of the advantages of putting it at Lindemar and the Park and Ride is that because Samtrans already comes there, it could already become a traffic hub. They could increase you would have the justification very quickly to increase transportation in town. Okay?
Yes. Thank you, Tom. Hold on. Go ahead.
I'd like to also definitely wanting affordable housing, knowing that teachers, beginning teachers, you probably been through this already tonight, but also besides density, how about that idea of in-law units and that kind of thing being more easily.
I'm sorry, what units?
In-laws. Yeah.
I think East Palo Alto just approved it a few months ago, in-law housing or whatever it's called. Which is like second units, right? Isn't that what you're referring to?
I have a question. How does that fit in with our mega house ordinance? I mean, is that excluded from the mega house ordinance that we currently have?
Second unit.
No, not a second unit, an in-law unit. It's not necessarily a second unit. It's a unit within the original house that's not designated as a separate piece of property or
I
something.
mean, my recollection of the code is that that floor area would not be excluded, so if the commission's interested in making that exception, then that's something that we could analyze as, or put in as an action program.
I think that would be an interesting study. Just because I know we had an in-law unit as well, and if, you know, as my parents get older, that might be a possibility.
One of the other affordable housing areas could be, excuse me, the condo conversion. There was one approved up on Gateway, and if they convert that to condos, they did not go through with the project because of the economy at the time, and they may be looking into that, but that would allow for a lot of affordable units, which aren't available now.
Sorry, Commissioner, could you say that location one more time?
It's Gateway.
Up in Fairmont.
In Fairmont, a large, it's a large apartment complex that was approved for conversion. It would be the first one approved for conversion, but they didn't do it.
Okay, Sam?
Yeah, so I just want to build on what Tom was saying, because I think that's where it does make a lot of sense, because we're talking about where we can actually be looking to some sites that are already built and would really be more amicable to even affordable housing. Is if you look at all our shopping centers right now, you know, a lot of them are a little bit, you know, worn out and what have you, and to be able to go back and do this and to put housing on top of retail is a really good option, not just for the couple sites that Tom mentioned, but a lot of the different sites. I would say extend that to Manor and what have you, because in the general plan update, they actually have Eureka as a potential site to develop that way, and I think it looks really nice. I mean, if we could do that to all the different sites, that would have a lot of potential. But outside of that, what I did notice though also was the Hillside Meadows, and it states that it's 6.8 acres, and if I'm correct, that's at the end of Adobe, where they had put two really big houses. I mean, I don't think it's going to fall into the affordable housing, sorry folks, but I could have sworn I saw an advertisement recently that it was actually 37 acres up there. So I don't know if the rest of the acreage is not built or whatever, but it was definitely something about 37 acres in that same area right there. So it could be more, and they were definitely selling it as buildable residential, and I believe that's that same space. No, it's a different one?
37 acres is 5
If I could just clarify one point, in terms of what went into this map, this certainly is not every potential site for housing in the entire city. This was sort of a list of those that met the threshold, one of them being, you know, is it vacant? Well, yes, okay, let's put it on here. And does it have an assessed value to, you know, for the building versus the land that makes it such that market conditions are likely to allow for redevelopment? There are plenty of centers, and I'm just going to guess that the Lindenmar Shopping Center probably has a relatively high structure value, assessed value to land value, because, you know, it's a functioning shopping center, whereas there may be some others that have a lower ratio, and so that's where a lot of these mixed-use sites were identified as being more likely to actually redevelop. Certainly every commercial center in the city is eligible for this mixed-use classification, and so we have to draw the line somewhere on sites that may actually have a reasonable chance of making the cut, but we can take a look again at the data and see if there are other sites.
That sounds appealing to me.
Excuse, I have a comment, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but if we step back a couple steps and go back to the thought do we really need 413 additional units if we aren't going to increase by 6%? I mean, if we're, say, 3%, I mean, so you won't, if you look at those, and I know it's costly because that's a lot of time, but you may drop down in that total need and thus not have all these different sites that need, sensitive sites that need to be identified. So, like I said, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I do want to emphasize the fact that I really have a hard time thinking we're going to increase in the next 6 years by 6%. So, and that's the bottom line on that, because the following part is only 1%. So, thank you.
Didn't we establish that we're stuck with that number?
You know, it's my opinion that we're stuck with that number, to use the technical term, but, you know, to continue to demonstrate and advocate over time, you know, that really development pressures are not what the projections are saying. After a couple of these housing cycles, that may provide a basis for us to influence the next allocation cycle and maybe advocate for a lower number. But I don't think that anyone's going to dispute that the region is growing and that we're not only housing people that work in Pacifica. You know, we have a practical obligation that people are going to live here and work elsewhere where there is more substantial growth. And so, you know, it's a difficult problem. I'll just say that, and we can perhaps be more involved in the allocations for the next cycle.
It's a number that was given to us. There was a lot of analysis that was put into it by CCAG, ABAC, and all those for the region. So basically, that's what we have to work with.
Okay, Julie.
Yes, thank you for giving me another chance to just add a couple of comments. I just wanted to kind of follow up on what Tom said too about Eureka Square. You know, I noticed that like Eureka Square isn't in there, and this site, I know a library is hoped for in this location, but you know, the possibility of having some housing as part of that, I noticed it wasn't mentioned there. I'm just kind of adding alternatives that aren't on this. And following up with Tom's suggestion about Eureka Square. Also, I just want to, I remembered one more thing about the Hacienda Court site, is that there's a creek that runs through that. It's at the very bottom of a steep ravine. This where Hacienda Court is at the very end of that, and then that ravine goes all the way up. So I'm just once again kind of repeating myself, but I have big concerns about this. Although it looks like a large site, you know, it's actually really a steep slope coming down, and it's a creek. So just for your consideration. And I know, once again, I just have a little bit of the heebie-jeebies about the fish in the bowl, only because when I first was seated here, there was a horrendous lawsuit. The city was sued by the property owner at the time for tons of money. And there is some wetlands or something there. It just bears looking into before you use these numbers, because it was, you know, it's about paying the price for zoning something and making a promise that then you're not able to keep and getting blamed for. So that, and you know, this is a different, there's a lot of experience here on the Planning Commission, and you know, and I really admire you and the work you've done. So I'm sure you probably looked at this and are anticipating that possibility, but you know, just, that's all. I shouldn't, you know, it's like I get nightmares about it now, so sorry I'm having a post-traumatic stress syndrome moment at this, but when I see the fish on there, I go, you know, right, exactly.
You mentioned the bowl also, the bowl is not included.
Oh, the bowl is, so it's just the fish? Okay, just, I mean, but yeah, the fish. Yeah, okay, well then it's not the bowl, that's probably good.
Okay. Anybody else? Going once, twice.
I just have a question. Only 50% of the housing needs were met from the last housing element. What does that mean?
Sure. So every housing cycle, typically on an 8-year basis, regionally we receive an allocation through some statistical magic that says, Pacifica, to meet your projected housing need in the next 8 years, you have to construct this many units. So then the city goes and makes sure it has places situated with the right land use controls where if someone were so inclined, they could build housing of a certain number of units to then address that need. What we're saying when the city only met 50% of that, or whatever the exact number is in the report, which I don't recall, is the city provided the conditions for housing to be built, but the market or other factors weren't there to where the housing was actually approved and constructed. And so the city did what it could. Could it have done more? Perhaps. That's why we're here talking about what action programs and sites and so forth to identify for this next 8-year cycle that potentially will make it more likely that housing will be built. But, you know, when you look at the macroeconomic condition of the last 8-year cycle, so much of that was people losing their homes, you know, foreclosures. There's not a real incentive market-wise in many cases to construct lots of new housing. And so that's probably a significant factor, but we didn't go into great detail, and the point wasn't to analyze why housing wasn't built in the last cycle. It's to focus on what we can do to make it more successful in the coming cycle. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Thank you, Christian and Lee and commissioners and everybody who's come out. Thanks.
And Mr. Chairman, just a couple other notes. For those that aren't here or have interested people that would like to watch this, you can go to pacificcoast.tv and stream this online through YouTube. It's a service provided by our Kind Television recording staff today. And then, so you know, the next step for the housing element is outlined in the staff report. We're going to do our best to address and look into these comments that the commission and the members of the public so kindly provided. Where we can, we're going to modify this draft, and then we're going to get it into the state Housing and Community Development Department, or HCD. They're going to have 60 days to review it for compliance with state law, send us back a whole laundry list of comments, I'm sure. Then we have to go through and churn through those and address what we can, revise the document once more, bring it to a public hearing with the Planning Commission. So the same lovely faces you see here, you'll have another opportunity to come back and address them again. It'll be a little more formal, but we certainly invite you. You'll have 3 minutes each to comment. They'll be sitting up there. It'll be televised again. We'll take those comments, churn on it, revise it again as appropriate, and then take it to the City Council for final adoption. So we hope to do that in the early part of next year, perhaps February or March. And so if you'd like to be involved, and if you didn't get the emails on this, please see me before you leave. I'll get your name, your phone number, your email address, your affiliation. We'll make sure you're involved so you all have a chance for input. And thank you again for making the time to come out. Thanks, Christian.
Halloween outside on